The security camera's red light blinked steadily as Margaret Hendricks grabbed the black man by his throat, her fingers digging into his collar with a violence that would replay on social media within hours. The timestamp read 3:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon that had started like any other in Willowbrook Estates, but would end with a reckoning 20 years in the making. Chief Marcus Daniels had been laughing just moments before, his deep voice carrying across the community clubhouse's patio, where balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze. Pink and gold streamers twisted around the pergola posts, and the scent of barbecue smoke mingled with the chlorine from the nearby pool. His goddaughter Jasmine had turned 8 today, and watching her tear through gift wrapping with the same determined focus she applied to her math homework filled him with a warmth that made him forget, temporarily, about the weight of his badge and the constant vigilance his profession demanded. He'd changed out of his uniform deliberately, choosing a simple navy polo and khakis because today wasn't about being chief of police for the city of Millbrook. Today was about being Uncle Marcus, the man who taught Jasmine to ride a bicycle and who never missed her birthday parties, even when 18-hour shifts left him bone-tired. His sister Denise had moved to Willowbrook Estates 6 months ago, drawn by the promise of good schools and safe streets, though she'd warned him about the community's reputation for being unwelcoming to families who looked like theirs. "Uncle Marcus, come see what I got." Jasmine's voice cut through his thoughts as she bounded toward him, clutching a science kit that promised to turn her bedroom into a laboratory. Her braids bounced with each step, adorned with the glittery hair ties he'd brought her from the police department's community outreach program. "Let me guess," he said, crouching to her level. "You're going to create a potion that makes vegetables taste like ice cream." "No. Silly, I'm going to solve crimes like you do. But with chemistry." Her gap-toothed grin was infectious, and several adults nearby chuckled at her enthusiasm. The sound of Denise calling from the kitchen drew his attention. "Marcus, can you grab some more ice from the freezer inside the caterer's running low?" He stood, brushing off his knees, and made his way toward the clubhouse's main entrance. The building was a testament to the community's affluence, with its stone facade and elegant landscaping that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. As he pushed through the heavy glass doors, the contrast between the warm afternoon air and the building's aggressive air conditioning sent a chill down his spine. The ice machine hummed in the corner of the industrial kitchen, and he filled 2 large bags while mentally calculating how much longer the party would run. Jasmine's energy showed no signs of flagging, but he could see the tiredness creeping into Denise's eyes. Single motherhood was a relentless marathon, and these moments of celebration were precious but exhausting. As he stepped back outside, balancing the ice bags in his arms, he noticed a woman standing near the patio's entrance, her posture rigid with authority. Margaret Hendricks wore the navy blazer and gold badge that marked her as one of Willowbrook's HOA enforcement officers, a position she'd held for 3 years and wielded like a weapon against anyone who dared park their car 6 inches over the property line or failed to maintain their lawn to her exacting standards. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her pale blue eyes swept over the party with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for crime scenes. She held a clipboard against her chest like armor, and her mouth was set in a thin line that suggested she'd never encountered a situation she couldn't improve with a citation. "Excuse me." Her voice cut through the party chatter with the precision of a scalpel. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge of this gathering." Denise looked up from where she was helping Jasmine organize her gifts, her smile faltering. "I'm sorry. Is there a problem?" "There are several problems," Margaret replied, consulting her clipboard. "First, this party exceeds the maximum occupancy guidelines for community spaces. Second, you're using the barbecue equipment without proper authorization. And third," her gaze settled on Marcus as he approached with the ice, You have unauthorized individuals loitering on the premises." The word loitering hung in the air like a slap, and Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with being reduced to a stereotype. He set the ice bags down carefully, his movements deliberate and non-threatening despite the anger building in his core. "I'm not loitering," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm attending my goddaughter's birthday party. Denise Richardson is my sister, and she's a resident here." Margaret's eyes narrowed as she looked him up and down, taking in his casual clothes and finding them wanting. "I don't see your name on the guest list that was submitted to the HOA office." "Guest list." Denise stepped forward, her voice rising slightly. "Mrs. Hendricks, I submitted a request to use the clubhouse for Jasmine's party, and it was approved. I wasn't aware that I needed to provide a guest list for a child's birthday party. All events must include a complete roster of attendees for security purposes," Margaret replied, her tone suggesting that this was common knowledge that only irresponsible people would ignore. And individuals who aren't pre-approved cannot access community facilities. Marcus pulled out his wallet, extracting his driver's license. "Here's my identification. I'm Chief Marcus Daniels with the Millbrook Police Department. I can provide additional verification if needed." Margaret glanced at the license dismissively. "Anyone can claim to be anything. I've seen fake IDs before, and I've dealt with people who try to use intimidation tactics to get their way." The accusation of intimidation hit like a physical blow, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of being prejudged based on his appearance. Around them, the party guests had begun to notice the confrontation, voices dropping to whispers as they tried to appear as though they weren't listening while hanging on every word. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to intimidate anyone," Marcus said, his professional training kicking in as he modulated his voice to remain calm. "I'm simply here to celebrate my goddaughter's birthday. If there's been a misunderstanding about the party arrangements, I'm sure we can resolve it without disrupting the children's celebration." "The children's celebration is already disrupted by the presence of individuals who don't belong here," Margaret shot back, her clipboard now pressed against her chest like a shield. "This is a private community, and we have rules for a reason." Jasmine had stopped playing with her friends and was watching the exchange with wide eyes, her earlier joy replaced by confusion and growing fear. Marcus caught her gaze and offered a reassuring smile, but inside, he was calculating his options. He could call the Millbrook PD dispatch and have them verify his identity, but that would escalate the situation and likely traumatize the children further. He could show his badge, but it was in his truck parked outside the community gates, and leaving to retrieve it might be seen as abandoning the confrontation. "Uncle Marcus, what's wrong?" Jasmine's small voice cut through the tension, and he saw tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Sometimes adults have misunderstandings, but we'll work it out." Margaret stepped closer, and Marcus caught a whiff of her perfume, something floral and cloying that reminded him of funeral homes. "I'm calling security to have you removed from the premises. You can discuss your concerns with them." "Mrs. Hendricks, please," Denise interjected, moving protectively toward her daughter. "This is my brother. He's a respected member of law enforcement, and he's never caused any problems in this community." "Your brother," Margaret repeated, her tone suggesting she found the family relationship dubious. "And I suppose you have documentation proving this relationship?" The question was so absurd that several party guests exchanged incredulous looks. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly resident who lived 3 doors down from Denise, stepped forward with her walker. "Margaret, I've seen this man visiting Denise regularly since she moved here. He brings Jasmine to school sometimes, And he's always polite and respectful. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here? Margaret wheeled on the older woman, her composure beginning to crack. Mrs. Peterson, I appreciate your input, but security is my responsibility. I've had reports of suspicious individuals in the community, and I'm simply doing my job. Suspicious individuals. Mrs. Peterson's voice carried the authority of someone who'd survived 8 decades and wasn't impressed by petty tyrants. The only suspicious behavior I see is yours. Interrogating a man at his niece's birthday party. The confrontation was attracting more attention now, with residents from neighboring units stepping out onto their patios to see what was happening. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares. Some curious, others sympathetic, a few openly hostile. He'd experienced this kind of scrutiny his entire life, but it never got easier, especially when it happened in front of children. I'm going to ask you one more time to leave voluntarily, Margaret said, pulling out her cell phone. If you refuse, I'll have to take additional measures. Marcus held up his hands in a placating gesture. Ma'am, I understand you're concerned about community security, but I'm not a threat to anyone here. I'm an off-duty police officer, attending a family celebration. Perhaps we could contact the HOA board president to clarify the guest policy. Margaret's face flushed red, and her grip on the phone tightened. Don't tell me how to do my job. I know exactly what you're doing. Trying to make me look unreasonable so you can do whatever you want in this community? The accusation hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger that came with being gaslit, with having his attempts at de-escalation twisted into aggression. But he also felt something else, a cold, professional awareness that this situation was spiraling beyond his control. Mom, why is that lady being mean to Uncle Marcus? Jasmine's voice was small and scared, and it cut through Marcus's rising anger like a knife. He looked down at his goddaughter, saw the confusion and fear in her 8-year-old eyes, and felt his protective instincts override his professional training. Sometimes people make mistakes, baby girl, he said softly, crouching down to her level again, but it's going to be okay. Margaret interpreted his movement toward the child as threatening, and something in her expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. Step away from the child, she shouted, her voice carrying across the pool area and causing several people to look up from their Saturday afternoon activities. The command was so unexpected, so completely divorced from reality, that Marcus froze in place. Around him, party guests began to murmur in confusion and growing anger. Denise moved quickly to place herself between Margaret and Jasmine, her maternal instincts overriding her desire to avoid confrontation. That's my daughter, Denise said, her voice shaking with emotion. And that's my brother. We're not doing anything wrong here. But Margaret was beyond reason now. Adrenaline and prejudice combining into a toxic cocktail that made rational thought impossible. She dialed 911 on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the numbers. 911. What's your emergency? This is Margaret Hendricks at Willowbrook Estates. I need police assistance immediately. We have an aggressive male refusing to leave community property, and he's making threatening gestures toward children. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he heard the words that would bring armed officers to a children's birthday party. Officers who would see a black man being accused of threatening children and might not stop to ask questions before acting. He'd seen too many situations like this go catastrophically wrong, had been to too many funerals for men who looked like him. Ma'am, please disconnect that call, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years in law enforcement. You're filing a false report, and people could get hurt. Margaret pointed at him triumphantly. Did you hear that he's trying to stop me from calling for help? He's threatening me. The absurdity of the situation would have been comical if it weren't so dangerous. Marcus was acutely aware that he was surrounded by witnesses, that whatever happened next would be dissected and analyzed. But he was also aware that Margaret Hendricks had just painted a target on his back that could have deadly consequences. The suspect is a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a navy shirt. Margaret continued into the phone, her eyes never leaving Marcus. He's been loitering on the property and refused multiple requests to leave. He's now exhibiting aggressive behavior and making threats. Marcus pulled out his own phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Chief Daniels. I need you to advise any units responding to a disturbance at Willowbrook Estates that I'm on scene as a private citizen. There's been a misunderstanding with community security." But Margaret lunged forward before he could complete the call, grabbing for his phone with a desperation that suggested she understood her credibility depended on controlling the narrative. "He's destroying evidence," she shouted to the 911 operator. "Send backup." The physical contact was brief but violent. Margaret's fingernails raked across Marcus's hand as she tried to snatch his phone, and, when he instinctively pulled back, she grabbed his shirt collar with both hands, the fabric bunched in her fists. And for a moment, they were locked in a bizarre struggle that looked far more serious than it was. "Let go of me," Marcus said firmly, trying to pry her fingers loose without using more force than necessary. But Margaret's grip tightened, and she pulled him forward with surprising strength. Then she grabbed his neck. Her fingers wrapped around his throat like a noose, and Marcus felt a primal surge of panic that had nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with the centuries of history that made a white woman's hands on a black man's neck a symbol of lynching and murder. He grabbed her wrists, not to hurt her, but to break her grip, and the motion sent them both stumbling backward. Margaret released him and immediately began screaming. "He attacked me! He put his hands on me!" Her voice carried across the community with the piercing quality of a smoke alarm, designed to summon help and attention. Marcus stepped back, his hands raised. But the damage was done. Margaret had red marks on her wrists where he'd grabbed them, marks that would look damning in photographs regardless of the context. Around them, phones had appeared as if by magic, recording the confrontation from multiple angles. "Everyone saw what happened." "Mrs. Peterson called out, her voice strong despite her age. "That woman grabbed him first." But Margaret was beyond hearing contradictory narratives. She continued screaming, her voice hoarse with emotion and righteous indignation. "Call the police. This man assaulted me. He's dangerous." In the distance, Marcus could hear sirens approaching, their wailing growing louder with each passing second. He looked around at the party guests, at the children who were now openly crying, at his goddaughter's birthday celebration that had been transformed into a nightmare. Denise appeared at his side, her face pale but determined. "Marcus, what do you need me to do?" He thought quickly, his mind racing through protocols and procedures. "Get the kids inside, all of them, and make sure someone's recording everything that happens next." As Denise began herding the children toward the clubhouse, Marcus remained on the patio, waiting for the arrival of officers who might not recognize him, who might see only what Margaret Hendricks wanted them to see: a black man accused of violence against a white woman. The first police cruiser arrived with its lights flashing, but no siren, suggesting the responding officers were treating this as a serious, but not immediately life-threatening situation. Marcus recognized the tactical approach arrive with enough show of force to establish control. But don't escalate unnecessarily. 2 officers emerged from the vehicle, both white, both young enough that Marcus wondered if they'd been on the force when he was still walking a beat. Officer Sarah Chen was compact and alert, her hand resting casually on her service weapon. Her partner, Officer Mike Torres, was taller and broader, with the kind of mustache that suggested he took his appearance seriously. Margaret rushed toward them like a woman possessed, her clipboard forgotten as she gestured wildly toward Marcus. "Officers, thank God you're here. That man attacked me. He grabbed me by the throat and threatened the children." Chen and Torres exchanged a quick glance. The kind of professional communication that happened between partners who'd worked together long enough to read each other's thoughts. Marcus could see them processing the scene: a well-dressed white woman in obvious distress, a black man standing alone with his hands visible, and a crowd of onlookers holding phones. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them and step away from the other people," Chen said, her voice calm but firm. It wasn't an unreasonable request, but Marcus felt the familiar sting of being treated as a suspect before anyone had bothered to determine what had actually happened. He complied without argument, moving several steps away from the nearest party guests. "Officers, I'm Chief Marcus Daniels with the Millbrook Police Department. I called my captain to advise him of the situation. This has been a misunderstanding that unfortunately escalated." Torres stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have identification that supports that claim?" Marcus slowly reached for his wallet, moving deliberately to avoid any sudden motions that could be misinterpreted. "My license is here, and my badge is in my truck parked outside the community gates. I'm off duty, attending my goddaughter's birthday party." Margaret interjected before the officers could examine his identification. "He's lying. I've seen him around here before, casing the neighborhood. He doesn't belong in this community." Chen held up a hand to silence Margaret, while Torres examined Marcus's driver's license. The younger officer's expression remained neutral, but Marcus could see him processing the information, weighing Margaret's hysterical accusations against the calm demeanor of the man standing before him. "The license says Marcus Daniels," Torres said to his partner, "but we'd need to verify the police chief claim." At that moment, Mrs. Peterson approached the officers with her walker, moving with the determined pace of someone who had something important to say. "Officers, I witnessed the entire incident. This woman," she pointed at Margaret, "initiated the physical contact. She grabbed this gentleman's throat completely unprovoked." Margaret whirled on the elderly woman. "Mrs. Peterson, you don't understand what you saw. This man was threatening behavior, and I was defending myself." "I'm 83 years old," Mrs. Peterson replied with steel in her voice. "My eyesight is perfect, and I know the difference between aggression and self-defense. That man never threatened anyone." More witnesses began to step forward, their voices overlapping as they offered their versions of events. The consensus was clear: Margaret had been the aggressor. Marcus had been defending himself, and the entire confrontation had been unnecessary and potentially dangerous. Chen was taking notes when another police cruiser arrived, this one unmarked but clearly official. Captain Elena Rodriguez emerged from the driver's seat, her presence immediately changing the dynamic of the scene. She was a 20-year veteran who'd worked her way up through the ranks, and her expression suggested she was not happy about being called to a community dispute on her day off. "Chief Daniels," she said, approaching Marcus with a mixture of relief and exasperation. "I got your call and came directly. What's the situation here?" The two young officers suddenly looked uncomfortable, realizing they'd been treating an actual police chief as a potential suspect. Torres stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Captain Rodriguez, we were responding to a 911 call about an aggressive male. We weren't aware." "That's exactly the problem," Rodriguez cut him off. "You weren't aware. You made assumptions based on appearance rather than gathering facts." She turned to Margaret, who was now looking considerably less certain about her position. Ma'am, are you the person who called 911? Margaret nodded, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. This man was trespassing on private property and became violent when I asked him to leave. Rodriguez looked around at the birthday party decorations, the children's faces pressed against the clubhouse windows, the clear evidence of a family celebration. This is a birthday party for a child. What exactly made you think Chief Daniels was trespassing? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Margaret's face began to flush red. She stammered something about security protocols and unauthorized guests. But her explanation sounded thin and unconvincing in the face of Rodriguez's professional skepticism. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, and he glanced down to see a notification from his sister. Channel 7 news truck just pulled up outside the gates. He looked up to see Rodriguez watching him, and he showed her the message. Her expression darkened as she realized the implications. A news crew arriving at a community dispute involving a black police chief and allegations of assault meant this story was about to become very public. Very quickly. Ma'am, Rodriguez said to Margaret, her voice taking on a formal tone. I need to advise you that filing a false police report is a criminal offense. Based on the witness statements I'm hearing, it appears you may have provided inaccurate information to the 911 dispatcher. Margaret's face went pale. False report. I was defending myself and my community. This man was acting suspiciously. How Rodriguez pressed. By attending his goddaughter's birthday party, by carrying ice from the kitchen to the patio, by providing identification when requested. Each question hit like a hammer blow, and Marcus could see Margaret beginning to realize that her narrative was falling apart under scrutiny. Around them, more residents had gathered to watch the confrontation, and several were openly recording the exchange on their phones. A news van pulled into the community's parking area, its satellite dish extending skyward like an antenna searching for scandal. Marcus recognized the reporter, stepping out of the passenger side, Angela Martinez from Channel 7, a woman who'd built her career on exposing injustice and holding power accountable. Captain Rodriguez, Martinez called out as she approached with her cameraman. We received reports of an incident involving Chief Daniels. Can you provide a statement? Rodriguez held up a hand to stop the news crew from getting too close. We're still investigating the situation, but I can confirm that Chief Daniels was attending a private family event when he was confronted by community security. Margaret seemed to shrink as she realized the scope of what was happening. This wasn't just a community dispute anymore. It was becoming a news story that would be broadcast across the city. Her behavior was about to be scrutinized by thousands of people who would judge her actions based on recorded evidence and witness testimony. I want to press charges, she said suddenly, her voice desperate. This man assaulted me. Look at these marks on my wrists. She held up her arms, displaying the red marks where Marcus had grabbed her wrists to break her grip on his throat. The marks were real, but Rodriguez was experienced enough to recognize defensive wounds versus offensive ones. Ma'am, those marks are consistent with someone grabbing your wrists to stop you from choking them, Rodriguez said bluntly. Multiple witnesses have stated that you initiated physical contact by grabbing Chief Daniels by the throat. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward again, her walker tapping against the concrete. Officer, I have video of the entire incident on my phone. My granddaughter taught me how to record things, and I started filming when this woman began acting erratically. The revelation that video evidence existed sent a visible shockwave through Margaret's composure. She looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape route, but found herself surrounded by witnesses, police officers, and now news media. Rodriguez extended her hand toward Mrs. Peterson. Ma'am, would you be willing to share that video with us for our investigation? Absolutely. Mrs. Peterson replied, fumbling with her phone. I may be old, but I know right from wrong. And what this woman did was wrong. As Mrs. Peterson worked to transfer the video file, Marcus became aware of a commotion near the community gates. More news vans were arriving, and he could see residents gathering in small groups, their conversations animated, and their expressions ranging from outrage to embarrassment. Angela Martinez approached him with her microphone. Chief Daniels, can you tell us what happened here today? Marcus considered his words carefully. As a public official, anything he said would be analyzed and potentially used against him. But he also understood the importance of controlling the narrative before it spiraled completely out of control. I was attending my 8-year-old goddaughter's birthday party when I was approached by community security, he said, his voice measured and professional. There was a misunderstanding about my presence here, which, unfortunately, escalated when I was physically assaulted. I'm grateful for the professional response from Captain Rodriguez and her officers. Martinez turned to Margaret. Ma'am, as the HOA security officer who initiated this confrontation, do you have any comment on the allegations that you physically assaulted a police chief? Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked around desperately, but found no allies in the crowd of residents who were now viewing her with mixtures of disgust and embarrassment. I was doing my job, she finally managed. This community has rules, and everyone has to follow them. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Rules that include grabbing visitors by the throat. The question hung in the air unanswered as Margaret realized that every word she spoke was being recorded and would likely be broadcast that evening. She turned and walked quickly toward the clubhouse, leaving behind her clipboard and what remained of her authority. Rodriguez approached Marcus as the news crew began interviewing other witnesses. Chief, I'm going to need you to come to the station to file a formal statement, based on what I've seen and heard here. We're looking at potential charges of assault, filing a false police report, and possibly civil rights violations. Marcus nodded, but his attention was drawn to the clubhouse where Jasmine was pressed against the window. Her birthday party dress wrinkled and her face streaked with tears. The sight hit him like a physical blow, reminding him of what this confrontation had really cost. Captain, I need to speak with my goddaughter first. He said, this is her birthday, and she shouldn't have to remember it this way. Rodriguez followed his gaze, and her expression softened. Of course. Take whatever time you need. We'll handle the paperwork later. Marcus walked toward the clubhouse, aware that cameras were following his movement, but focused only on the little girl who was waiting for him. As he approached the window, Jasmine broke away from the other children and ran to meet him at the door. Uncle Marcus, why did that lady hurt you? She asked, her small arms wrapping around his waist with the fierce protectiveness of childhood loyalty. He knelt down to her level, the same position he'd been in when Margaret had first approached with her accusations. Sometimes people make mistakes. Baby girl. Sometimes they're scared or angry about things that have nothing to do with us, and they make bad choices. But you didn't do anything wrong, Jasmine said, her 8-year-old sense of justice struggling to understand the adult world of prejudice and power. No, I didn't, Marcus agreed. And neither did you, and neither did your mom. This isn't about us. This is about someone who forgot how to treat people with kindness and respect. Outside, he could hear Rodriguez coordinating with the other officers, taking statements from witnesses, and beginning the process that would likely end Margaret Hendricks' career in community security. But inside the clubhouse, surrounded by birthday decorations and the concerned faces of children, Marcus focused on repairing what had been broken. Can we still have cake? Jasmine asked, and the question was so innocent and hopeful that Marcus felt his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "Absolutely," he said, standing up and taking her hand. "It's your birthday, and nothing is going to stop us from celebrating you." As they walked toward the party area, Denise appeared with a grateful smile and tears in her eyes. "Marcus, I'm so sorry this happened. I never thought—" "You don't have anything to apologize for," he said firmly. "This is your home. This is your community, and you have every right to celebrate your daughter's birthday here." The next hour passed in a strange combination of normalcy and surrealism. While police officers conducted interviews and news crews reported from the parking lot. Inside the clubhouse, a group of 8-year-olds sang "Happy Birthday" and devoured chocolate cake with vanilla frosting. Marcus helped Jasmine blow out her candles, played party games, and pretended that the most important thing in the world was whether she preferred chocolate or vanilla ice cream. But as the afternoon wore on, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Margaret Hendricks had been suspended from her position, pending an investigation. The HOA board president had arrived to personally apologize to Marcus and his family. 3 separate news outlets had requested interviews, and social media was already buzzing with hashtags calling for accountability and justice. By evening, the story had gone viral. Mrs. Peterson's video showed Margaret grabbing Marcus by the throat, clearly capturing the moment when she became the aggressor. The footage was damning, leaving no room for ambiguity about who had initiated the physical confrontation. Marcus sat in his office the following Monday morning, reading through the dozens of messages that had poured in over the weekend. Some were supportive, praising him for his professionalism under pressure. Others were predictably hateful, attacking him for playing the race card, or suggesting that he had somehow deserved Margaret's treatment. But the message that affected him most came from an unexpected source, the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. Chief Daniels. The letter began, "We want to formally apologize for the unacceptable behavior exhibited by our security officer. Margaret Hendricks has been terminated from her position, and we are reviewing all of our community policies to ensure this type of incident never happens again. We would like to invite you to work with us in developing a community relations program that promotes understanding and inclusion for all residents and their families." The letter was signed by all 7 board members, and it represented something Marcus had rarely seen in his career: genuine accountability and a commitment to change. 3 weeks later, Margaret Hendricks stood in a different courtroom, this time as a defendant rather than an accuser. She'd been charged with assault, filing a false police report, and violation of civil rights under color of authority. Her lawyer, a tired-looking man who clearly wished he were anywhere else, argued that his client had been overzealous in performing her duties, but had never intended to harm anyone. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Janet Walsh, painted a different picture. She presented Mrs. Peterson's video, played audio from the 911 call, and called witness after witness who testified to Margaret's pattern of targeting residents and visitors who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Walsh said in her closing argument, "this case isn't about community security or honest mistakes. This is about a woman who used her position of authority to terrorize people based on their race. And, when challenged, she escalated to physical violence and false accusations that could have had deadly consequences." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Margaret received a sentence of 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from working in any security capacity. She was also ordered to pay restitution to Marcus for emotional distress and to attend sensitivity training. But perhaps more importantly, The incident had sparked a broader conversation about accountability in communities across the state. The Daniels Standard became shorthand for holding HOA officials and community security personnel to the same legal and ethical standards as police officers. 6 months after Jasmine's birthday party, Marcus stood in the same clubhouse where he'd been assaulted. But this time, he was there for a very different reason. The Willowbrook Estates Community Relations Program was hosting its first annual diversity celebration, an event designed to bring together residents from all backgrounds for food, music, and conversation. Jasmine, now 9, and considerably more sophisticated in her understanding of the world, stood beside him wearing a junior police badge and a smile that could light up the room. She'd become something of a celebrity in the community, known as the little girl whose birthday party had changed everything. "Uncle Marcus," she said, tugging on his uniform sleeve. "Look how many people came." The clubhouse was packed with residents Marcus had never seen before. People who'd been afraid to use community facilities because they didn't feel welcome. There were families with children, elderly residents who'd been isolated by language barriers, and young professionals who'd kept to themselves rather than risk confrontation. Mrs. Peterson, now the unofficial community historian, approached them with her walker and a plate of homemade cookies. "Chief Daniels, I wanted you to know that Margaret Hendricks' replacement is a lovely young woman named Sarah Chen. She used to be a social worker, and she believes in treating everyone with dignity." Marcus smiled, recognizing the name. Officer Sarah Chen had been one of the responding officers on the day of the incident, and she'd left the police force to pursue a career in community building. It was a fitting transition that suggested the incident had inspired change in more ways than one. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself in conversations with residents who shared their own stories of feeling unwelcome or targeted. An elderly Latino man described how Margaret had repeatedly cited him for excessive noise when he played music during family gatherings. A young Muslim woman talked about being questioned every time she entered the community pool area. A disabled veteran mentioned how his service dog had been deemed suspicious, despite his obvious need for assistance. Each story was a reminder that Margaret's behavior toward Marcus hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of discrimination that had poisoned the community for years. But they were also stories of resilience, of people who'd refused to be driven away by one person's hatred. The keynote speaker for the evening was Dr. Amanda Jefferson, a civil rights historian who'd written extensively about housing discrimination. She talked about the progress that had been made and the work that remained, but she focused particularly on the power of individuals to create change. "Change doesn't always happen in courtrooms or legislative chambers," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "Sometimes it happens when an 8-year-old girl's birthday party becomes a catalyst for justice. Sometimes it happens when neighbors decide to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." After her speech, Jasmine approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd already learned that her voice mattered. "My name is Jasmine Richardson, and this is where I had my 8th birthday party. It wasn't the party I planned, but it was the party that changed everything. I want to thank everyone who stood up for my Uncle Marcus, and I want to tell you that this is what community looks like. Not the old kind that kept people out, but the new kind that brings people in." The applause was thunderous, and Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he watched his goddaughter address a room full of adults with the wisdom of someone who'd learned early that justice wasn't automatic, but had to be fought for and defended. As the evening wound down and residents began to filter out, Marcus found himself standing on the same patio where Margaret had grabbed his throat. But now, instead of isolation and hostility, he was surrounded by friends and allies who'd emerged from a community he'd initially written off as irredeemably prejudiced. Denise joined him, carrying a sleepy Jasmine who'd finally exhausted herself from excitement. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if Mrs. Peterson hadn't filmed everything," she said quietly. "If people hadn't spoken up." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of that alternative reality. But they did speak up. And that's what makes all the difference. As they walked toward the parking lot, Jasmine lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. "Uncle Marcus, can we have my next birthday party here too?" He laughed, the sound echoing across the community that had become, against all odds, a symbol of redemption and hope. "Absolutely. Baby girl, we'll have it right here. And we'll invite everyone." 2 years later, Margaret Hendricks completed her community service and disappeared from public life, moving to another state where she hoped to escape the notoriety of her actions. The security company that had employed her paid a substantial settlement to Marcus and implemented new training protocols for all their employees. But the real legacy of that Saturday afternoon wasn't about punishment or legal consequences. It was about the transformation of a community that had learned to see itself clearly and chosen to become something better. The Willowbrook Estates Community Relations Program became a model for HOA reform across the state, with Marcus serving as an advisor and Jasmine as its unofficial mascot. Mrs. Peterson's video had been viewed millions of times, becoming a teaching tool in law enforcement academies and civil rights organizations. And every year on Jasmine's birthday, the community gathered to celebrate not just her special day, but the day they'd all learned what it meant to stand up for justice. Even when it was difficult, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant admitting they'd been wrong. Marcus stood in his office one final time as chief of police, preparing for his retirement after 30 years of service. On his desk was a framed photo from Jasmine's 10th birthday party, showing dozens of children from every background imaginable, their faces painted with frosting and joy. The incident that had begun with hatred and fear had evolved into something beautiful and lasting. A community had been transformed. Relationships had been built. And a little girl had learned that her voice mattered, that justice was possible, and that sometimes the most important victories happened not in courtrooms, but in the hearts of people who chose to see each other as human beings, deserving of dignity and respect. As he turned off the lights and closed the door for the last time, Marcus smiled at the memory of Margaret Hendricks grabbing him by the throat, thinking she was attacking just another black man who didn't belong. She'd had no idea she was confronting someone with the power to hold her accountable. But more importantly, she'd had no idea she was catalyzing a change that would outlast them all. The security cameras had captured it all. But the real story wasn't about what happened in those 3 minutes of confrontation. It was about what happened afterward, when a community chose courage over comfort, justice over silence, and love over fear. It was about karma hitting hard. But it was also about redemption arriving softly, in the laughter of children and the clasped hands of neighbors who'd learned to see each other clearly. In the end, Margaret Hendricks had gotten exactly what she deserved. But more importantly, everyone else had gotten something they'd never expected, a chance to be better than they'd been before. Together,